No more Mr. Nice Guy. President Donald Trump telling Tehran the time to take a deal is now, or risk seeing, quote, every single power plant and every single bridge in the country being blown up. A major escalation that would harm the Iranian people and not just the terrorist regime. Right now, a delegation led by Vice President J.D. Vance is heading to Islamabad in hopes of brokering a deal before it's too late. The deadline for the current two-week ceasefire is set to expire Wednesday. With Trump's negotiating team on the way to Pakistan, the president is not backing down when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz. The commander-in-chief accusing Iran of violating the temporary deal between the United States and Iran by their militants opening fire on ships crossing the key passageway for oil. Tehran, though, maintaining that the strait is closed and that the U.S. is to blame. The regime claims the American blockade of Iranian ports violates the ceasefire deal itself, calling it a, quote, foolish and ignorant decision. Is there an off-ramp to avoid a full-scale war, or will bombs start dropping again soon? Plus, the U.S. on high alert for severe weather as lines of storms push eastward, bringing damaging winds and hail to some areas already hit by tornadoes this week. Which states could be hit the hardest, and which rivers and dams are at risk of overflowing? A lot to get to today. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Anna Kooiman in New York City. Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock on the East Coast, Sunday, April the 19th, and it's time for NewsNation Live. We're going to start with NewsNation's Robert Sherman live for us there in Tel Aviv. Robert, Trump's threats would essentially give an economic death blow to Iran. So when he says he may strike bridges and power plants, is that more tough talk, or could we see him follow through?
Well, you listen to what the president says, Anna. He is making it clear to Iran that they know what the deal is, they know what the offer is on the table, and they know what the consequence is if they walk away from these negotiations. With Ambassador to the UN Mike Waltz saying today, Iran should take this threat seriously.
Any type of infrastructure that is being commingled, that is being used to move military hardware, is absolutely a legitimate target, as are power plants, the grid, and other things that are being used to power Iran's war economy.
Tense weekend here in the region, as well as specifically in the Strait of Hormuz, in which Iran has attacked at least 2 ships that have been in or near that key waterway. The U.S. says the naval blockade is not going anywhere, and also says that they're prepared to start boarding Iranian ships. Another level of escalation and pressure they're hoping to place on Iran. But Iran's president digging his heel in the sand, saying, we were not the initiators of the war. We did not attack anywhere, nor do we currently intend to attack anyone. We are seeking our rights. They are trying, through bullying, to deny the rights of a nation. Iran's position is they should have the right to enrich uranium. The United States' position is Iran shouldn't be able to do that for, at the very least, a long time, if not indefinitely, due to the threat that is perceived to be posed by the Iranian regime. That is where you still have the biggest divide existing between these two negotiating teams. Anna?
Right, and Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terror in the world, as we know, and Israel announcing that it killed a top Hezbollah commander just before their ceasefire with Lebanon began. How are things playing out on that front?
Well, the ceasefire is still holding. It has remained rather calm here so far, and I would say that there is a bit more optimism, especially with the possibility of historic diplomacy on the horizon. As the president says, in the coming days or weeks, he wants to host Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Aoun of Lebanon, which would be historic. We have not seen high-level talks like this taking place between these two nations in decades. 2 countries do not have diplomatic ties with one another, never signed a peace agreement, which the White House says they are hoping to get in the same room and sitting down face-to-face in a matter of days here. Anna?
Yep, and Robert, my producer, just handed me the latest from The Wire, saying that Israel is revealing there's a new forward defense line in southern Lebanon after this ceasefire, and it would likely raise concerns there in Lebanon about the scope and the duration of Israel's presence there. A lot happening in the region. Stay safe. Thank you so much. NewsNation's Robert Sherman. Appreciate it. All right, everybody, we're going to bring in Washington Democratic Representative and House Armed Services Committee Ranking Member Adam Smith. Congressman Smith, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the chance.
All right, we've been watching this military buildup for quite some time now, and 10,000 more American military members are on their way to the Middle East. And we know Trump reportedly convened a meeting in the Situation Room this weekend. What does all that say to you about what may happen in the coming days?
Well, we're not sure. It's not clear, but it certainly says that the president is getting ready to follow through on his threats to escalate this conflict and resume a bombing campaign in Iran. There's not yet any indication that there would be ground troops involved, but the president is putting our forces in position to attack if the negotiations don't resolve this conflict. And it appears highly unlikely that those negotiations are actually going to resolve the conflict. So there's a major, major danger of this war escalating and the cost going up even higher, certainly for the region, but also for the United States and for the world, as we've seen the impact this has had on the global economy.
Right, and Democrats continue to say that this was a war of choice, but the president maintains that, look, he's really adamant. He said Iran was close to having a nuclear weapon, and he's just echoing presidents in the past about it being a very bad idea if Iran had one. Listen here.
Yeah.
We have moved to counter Iran's support of international terrorism, and in particular its backing for violent opponents of peace in the Middle East. At the same time, we have tried to stop its quest to acquire weapons of mass destruction.
As President and Commander-in-Chief, I will do what is necessary to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
The United States is clear. We will not allow Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon.
Look, Trump says previous presidents have just been kicking the can down the road. Do you see him fulfilling his promise of quote, doing what should have been done by presidents before him, in his words?
Yeah, rather emphatically, no. Iran did not develop a nuclear weapon under any of those presidents. We used diplomacy. In the case of Barack Obama, we used the JCPOA to stop them. And they had not developed a nuclear weapon as a result of that. All those presidents also concluded that military action was unlikely to stop Iran's movement towards a nuclear weapon and would come at an enormous cost. That diplomacy and other deterrent factors were a better approach. And I think that has been borne out by this war. It is the case that Iran right now is every little bit as close to a nuclear weapon as they were when this war started. Now, they weren't really that close. They had uranium, they have enrichment capability, but they were still months, maybe even a year off. There were other better ways to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon than launching a war that has empowered the Iranian regime in many ways. The hardliners have dug in, and now Iran has discovered the choke point that is the Strait of Hormuz. So all those other presidents found a way to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon without the catastrophe that we're seeing now from this full-scale Middle East war.
Yeah, I guess it still goes back to what is the definition of imminent, right? The president and the Secretary of War, they continue to say that this was an imminent threat, and we can't wait until Iran has a nuclear weapon or they're, a day away, because then what if they end up using it? I want you to take a listen, because last hour I spoke with California Independent Representative Kevin Kiley about what all this means for Iran if they were to have a nuclear weapon. Listen.
This is not just a slogan. I mean, let's think about what it means if Iran actually had a nuclear weapon. If one of the most evil regimes in history got its hands on the most destructive weapon in history. Put aside the horror of them actually using a weapon. Think about how they'd be able to use just their capability in order to, export terror at a level that is orders of magnitude higher than they have already.
So Iran, the regime, they kind of talk out of both sides of their mouth, and sometimes they say that, we have a right to defend ourselves and we should be able to do this, and the United States is bullying us by not allowing us to have a nuclear weapon. And then they also say that this is just for cooling food and refrigerators and making sure we need it for AC units and things. So do you share the same sentiment of Congressman Kiley here?
Sorry, there's a lot there. Yes, without question, Iran should not have a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran has not said that they should have a right to have a nuclear weapon. What they've said is they should have a right to enrich uranium for the purposes of nuclear power. I don't trust that they wouldn't go further, but let's be clear. They have not said we have a divine right to a nuclear weapon and we're going for it no matter what. And on the imminent threat issue, we know that the threat wasn't imminent because Donald Trump has told us for the last 8 months that it wasn't imminent. He's told us that the bombing campaign that Israel and the U.S. conducted last June had completely obliterated and eliminated Iran's nuclear weapons capability. Now, as the president is wont to do, he says things that are not even remotely accurate and way overstated. But it is true that Iran's weapons program had been significantly degraded to the point where there's no way it was imminent. So again, we have President Trump saying, oh, it's an imminent threat after he starts this war. But prior to starting the war, he told us over and over again that because of his actions a year ago, or I guess 9 months ago now, 10 months ago, that it wasn't imminent. It's very clear that Iran's nuclear weapons program was not an imminent threat when this war started. It started because Israel convinced the president that they had an opportunity for a decapitation strike to take out the Iranian regime once and for all. And they took out the leadership, but the regime proved every little bit as resilient as everyone in the military had always been telling me that it was. So that's what this is about. Let's not talk about like an imminent nuclear threat. That's not why this war started.
All right, Washington Democratic Representative and House Armed Services Committee Ranking Member Adam Smith, thank you so much for arguing your positions today. Great to see you.
Thank you. Thanks for giving me the chance. I appreciate it.